The day my husband, Peter Vale, died, his favorite mug was still on the kitchen counter, half full, the coffee inside long gone cold like the plans we used to whisper about in the dark. We had 24 years, long enough to build a home, long enough to believe in permanence, long enough for me to think I had finally found my place in the world. My name is Clara Vale. I am 63 years old, and 4 days after we laid Peter to rest, his children came to take everything they said was never mine. Michael and Daniel came without calling first. They didn't bring food or offers of comfort. They walked directly into Peter's study, as if it were already theirs, the very room where he'd read his poetry aloud, where he'd gripped my hand the afternoon the doctor called with the first troubling test results. Michael was the eldest, imposing, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, always dressed in clothes that demanded respect. Daniel lingered beside him, saying less but watching more. Their expressions held no sorrow. They were filled with a quiet, efficient assessment. "Clara," Michael began, my name sounding like a title on a form he needed to complete. "We need to discuss the estate." That word, estate, landed with more finality than any eulogy. My husband was barely in the ground, and they were already cataloging his life. Daniel spoke up, his voice softer but no less firm. "We know this is difficult, but certain legalities require immediate attention." I looked at them, standing in Peter's sanctuary, breathing the air of a house they'd visited only on holidays. They hadn't been there through the endless chemotherapy sessions. They hadn't adjusted his pillows at 3 in the morning. They hadn't heard the fragile confession of his fears when the pain was bad. Yet here they were, ready to collect. "What legalities?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Michael opened a leather folio on Peter's desk. Inside were documents with official seals, according to Dad's last will, the primary residence, the mountain cabin, and the majority of his business interests passed to Daniel and me. My heart stuttered. Our home, the walls that held our laughter, our occasional fierce arguments, our dreams of growing old together. And for me, Daniel shifted his weight. "There's a life insurance policy, $250,000. $250,000, a sum that might sound generous to an outsider, to a woman who had put her own career as a librarian on hold to care for a home and a husband, who had nursed him through his final illness. It felt like a severance package, a dismissal. In that crystalline moment, I understood the terrible truth. I was not family to them. I was a complication to be resolved. Michael leaned against the desk, a posture of ownership. "This house is appraised at just over $1 million. The cabin is another $800,000. The consulting firm provides a stable income. Dad wanted it all to remain with the bloodline." The bloodline, a phrase that excluded every shared meal, every quiet evening, every sacrifice. I nodded slowly, clinging to composure. "And where am I to live?" "You have 30 days, Michael replied without a hint of hesitation. "That should be ample time to make arrangements. 30 days to pack a lifetime. 30 days to find a new place, to box up memories, to grieve all at once." "We're not trying to be cruel, Clara," Daniel added, "but Dad always felt that legacy should follow family, as if love and decades of partnership weren't a form of family." I thought of Peter's hand in mine, of him calling me his cornerstone. Now his sons were informing me I was worth little more than a line item. "There's also the matter of the medical expenses," Michael said, his tone shifting to one of grim necessity. "The insurance covered a lot, but there's still a balance, around $200,000. The air left my lungs, that would consume almost the entire insurance payout." "Those obligations are yours," Daniel said, almost gently. "You were his spouse. You co-signed the decisions. The hospital will pursue you for payment." I let the pieces click into place. "So, to be clear," I said, my voice hollow, "you take the houses, you take the business, you take the future, and I am left with the debt." Michael didn't blink. "The will is quite specific." My eyes swept the study one last time, the shelves of his beloved books, the window where he'd watched the birds, the photograph from our commitment ceremony. They weren't just claiming assets, they were erasing my presence. The worst of it wasn't the financial ruin. It was their calm, polite detachment as they carried out the demolition. That afternoon, I found myself in the familiar, slightly shabby office of Arthur Finch, the lawyer Peter had used for decades. The room smelled of old paper and lemon polish. "Clara," he said, his kind face etched with concern, "you don't have to accept this. The will they presented, it can be contested." "On what grounds?" I asked, exhausted. "Substantial ones. Peter made amendments very near the end. We could argue undue influence, lack of full capacity. We can tie everything up in probate, force them to the negotiating table. Tie everything up, I repeated. How long? Months, possibly years. And what do I live on during those years? Arthur hesitated. The insurance money would be released, but the medical creditors, they wouldn't wait. You could be financially drained long before a settlement. So I would be destitute, heartsick, and battling to men who saw me as an obstacle. Arthur leaned forward. Clara, they are counting on you being too weary and too afraid to fight. That's how people like Michael and Daniel win. I stared at my own hands, at the veins that seemed more prominent now, the skin thinner. Peter always promised I'd be safe, that I'd never want for anything. Which is why this document feels wrong. Arthur insisted. This doesn't sound like the Peter I knew. What if I don't fight? I asked quietly. He blinked. You mean, just sign everything over? What if I let them have what they're so desperate for? How quickly could it be done? Clara, you'd be surrendering all your rights. There's no going back. How quickly? A week, perhaps 2. I closed my eyes. A legal war would devour the last of my spirit, but surrender felt like stepping off a cliff. I am not weak, I whispered, more to myself than to him. I am just so very tired of being treated as if I'm invisible. Arthur's expression was pained. I believe you're making a mistake. Perhaps, I replied, but it will be my mistake to make. That night, the silence in the house was a physical presence. Every familiar creak, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of the hall clock, they all echoed in the emptiness Peter had left. I imagined the courtroom, the cold stares from Michael and Daniel, the whispers about the gold-digging second wife. I didn't have the stamina for that kind of spectacle. So I made a different choice. I called Arthur Finch the next morning and told him to draw up the necessary papers for a swift transfer. He tried again to dissuade me. I listened patiently, but my mind was already elsewhere. Let them think they've won, I thought. Let them believe I'm defeated. Grief has a way of making you appear fragile. It invites others to underestimate you. Michael and Daniel had already written me off, but what they didn't realize was that I had stopped seeking their approval or their mercy. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one observing everything. After the call, I went into Peter's study. His sandalwood scent still lingered. His chair was slightly angled, as if he'd just risen to make a cup of tea. I rested my palm on the cool wood of his desk. You always told me to trust my gut, I murmured, almost in answer. My fingers brushed against something inside the shallow center drawer, a small, tarnished silver key. It was old, weighty in my hand. I turned it over. It didn't belong to any lock in the house, yet Peter had hidden it in the place he reserved for his most private things, his grandfather's pocket watch. The first letter I ever wrote him. This was different. I slipped the key into my pocket and moved through the day as expected. The grieving widow, packing her life into cardboard boxes. Michael and Daniel called, their voices polite but edged with impatience. They wanted this concluded. That urgency alone felt wrong. Peter was deliberate, methodical. His sons were acting like men racing a clock. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the key cool against my palm. What were you showing me, Peter? I whispered into the quiet, my breath caught. I looked at the key, a safe deposit box. He had never mentioned it, never hinted at any secret. Yet here was something he had kept from everyone, even his sons. Before doubt could paralyze me, I grabbed my purse and coat and drove downtown. I told no one. For the first time since Peter's death, a spark of purpose flickered inside me. If there was a truth waiting in that vault, I needed to find it. The bank was hushed, a sanctuary of marble and muted light. A teller directed me to a Mrs. Jenkins, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. When I gave her Peter's name and the number 214, she nodded. Double quotes. Mr. Vale was a regular visitor these last few months, she said softly. Right this way. She led me through a secured door, down a cool corridor, and into a vault where the air smelled of metal and time. Walls of numbered steel boxes gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Only you and your husband were listed as Khaleesi's, she mentioned as she used her master key alongside mine. He was here most recently, about 5 months ago. 5 months ago, when the treatments had become aggressive, when the future had shrunk to the next appointment. The box was heavier than I anticipated. Mrs. Jenkins placed it in a small, private room and left me alone. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, Everything was meticulously organized. Files, envelopes, bound documents, a few photographs. Peter's hand was evident in the order. I reached for a bank statement first. It was for an entity named Anchor Holdings LLC. The balance made my vision swim. $5.3 million. Scrawled in the margin was a note in Peter's hand. Clara, this is ours. Moved it to keep it safe from the storm. Tears blurred the numbers. We weren't destitute. He had been protecting me. The next folder turned my blood cold. It contained printed email exchanges between Michael and an unfamiliar address. The language was cold, transactional. Dad's cognitive days are limited. We need to restructure the asset transfer before she gets any legal ideas. The response was worse. Once the new power of attorney is filed, we can channel everything through the holding company. She'll be left with the shell. They had been plotting while he was dying. Another folder held surveillance photos. Michael entering a high-stakes poker club downtown. Daniel in a parked car, exchanging an envelope with a man whose face was familiar from financial scandal headlines. There were bank records showing staggering personal debts. Loans taken against the business without Peter's knowledge. And then, beneath it all, I found it. A newer will, dated a mere 3 weeks before Peter's passing. This one left everything to houses, the business, the investments to me, in a trust for my lifetime. It was notarized and witnessed by 2 people I didn't recognize, with affidavits attesting to Peter's sound mind and clear intent. The will they had shown me was a relic, a decoy. My legs gave way, and I sat down hard on the leather chair. They were committing fraud. At the very bottom of the box lay a sealed linen envelope with my name written in his familiar script. Clara opened this last. With unsteady hands. I broke the seal. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the boys have shown their true colors. I am so sorry. He wrote of their sudden, suffocating attentiveness as his health failed. Their pointed questions about account numbers, property deeds. Their concern felt not like love, but like the anxiety of heirs checking their inheritance. So, I hired a man named Silas, he continued, a discreet investigator. I had to know. What Silas found was worse than mere greed. Michael had leveraged his share of the business to cover catastrophic gambling losses, putting the entire company at risk. Daniel had been systematically siphoning client retainers into offshore accounts. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively looting a sinking ship. Peter explained how he had quietly liquidated non-essential assets and moved the capital into Anchor Holdings, how he had mortgaged both the house and the cabin to their maximum values. Not to spend the money, but to burden the titles with debt. The properties are not gifts, Clara. They are anchors. If the boys take them, they take the weight. 2. He had turned their avarice into a trap. The final lines of his letter brought a painful, cathartic ache to my chest. I am sorry for the secrecy. I feared what they might do if they thought you knew, but I needed you to be safe. I have given you the weapons, my love. The choice of how to use them is yours. Be brave. You always were stronger than anyone knew, especially you. All my love, always. Peter, for the first time since his death, I didn't feel alone. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been standing guard all along. That evening, Michael invited me to dinner at his condominium. Daniel and his wife, Bianca, would be there. A final family meal before we put all this business behind us, he said, his voice smooth, but the irony was almost laughable. They sat across from me at a glossy table, set with china they likely bought on credit. They made pleasant conversation. They asked after my health with synthetic concern. Michael talked of modernizing the mountain cabin. Daniel mentioned a potential buyer for the consulting firm. They were spending an inheritance that wasn't theirs. I nodded, sipping mineral water, the files from the safe deposit box vivid in my mind. Casually, over the main course, I mentioned the odd key I'd found in Peter's desk. Michael's knife stilled for a fraction of a second. Daniel's smile tightened. A safe deposit box, I imagine, I said, watching them. Isn't that strange? He never mentioned it. Michael recovered with a practiced smile. Dad loved his little mysteries. Probably just old stock certificates. I thought I should probably look into it before we sign everything next week, I added. Daniel cleared his throat. That might just complicate things, Clara. Stir up confusion. It's better to keep the process clean. Confusion, I echoed mildly. Peter always said I had a good head for details. They did not laugh. As dessert was served, I saw it plainly. They were afraid, and their fear told me I was holding the reins. The next morning, we gathered in Arthur Finch's conference room. Michael and Daniel sat with their lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Reynolds. I arrived with a new companion, a woman named Gwen Sterling, a litigation attorney specializing in fiduciary law and elder abuse, whom Arthur, once he saw the contents of the box, had urgently recommended. The air was thick with the expectation of a quick, uncontested surrender. Michael began, "Shall we proceed with the transfer documents? Clara has agreed to the terms." Gwen Sterling opened her briefcase with a calm, deliberate motion. "There appears to be a prior and superior claim," she said, her voice cool and clear. She slid copies of the new will across the polished table. Arthur Finch, looking pale, picked one up. This wasn't in my files, because Mr. Vale terminated his relationship with your firm 7 months ago, Mr. Finch," Gwen stated. "He discovered a conflict of interest." Reynolds, the son's lawyer, scanned the document, his face hardening. "This is highly irregular. We'll need to authenticate it." "Is authenticated," Gwen interrupted, placing the notarized affidavits next to it, along with the bank records for Anchor Holdings and the mortgage documents for the 2 properties in question. "What mortgage documents?" Michael snapped. Gwen slid those across as well. "The primary residence carries a lien of $1.3 million. The mountain cabin has an $850,000 loan against it." Daniel's face went ashen. "That's impossible. They're owned free and clear." "They were," Gwen corrected. "Your father took out the loans 6 months ago. The proceeds were deposited into Anchor Holdings." Michael laughed, a brittle, nervous sound. "So there's debt. The estate can settle it from the assets. The estate's primary liquid asset is the Anchor Holdings account, which, per the valid will, belongs solely to Mrs. Vale," Gwen replied. "The debt, however, is attached to the real estate, which, according to the invalid will you presented, you are set to inherit." The room went very still. Then Gwen laid out the rest. The investigator's report on Michael's gambling, the forensic accounting of Daniel's embezzlement, the damning emails. She spoke of fiduciary duty, elder exploitation, and criminal fraud. "You were systematically stealing from a vulnerable man," Gwen said, her gaze icy. "The district attorney's office for financial crimes would be very interested." Michael turned to me, his mask of arrogant control finally cracking. "Clara, this is nonsense. You can't believe this." I folded my hands on the table, meeting his gaze. "I believe what Peter left for me, and he left me everything." Daniel whispered, "We're finished." "Not necessarily," Gwen said. She placed one final document in front of me. It was a deed. "Mrs. Vale is prepared to offer you a path forward." Michael's eyes lit with a desperate hope. "See, reasonable." I picked up the pen. "You wanted the houses so badly," I said quietly, "so you can have them." I signed. Gwen witnessed it. She pushed the document to Reynolds. He read it, then read it again, his complexion turning gray. This deed transfers both properties, along with all associated financial obligations and liens." Michael stared. "What obligations?" "The mortgages, totaling over $2 million. They transfer with the title. You would be assuming the debt." Daniel shot to his feet, his chair screeching. "You said the estate would pay." "The estate, under the lawful will, has no obligation to do so," Gwen said. "This deed is a gift of the properties in their current condition. That condition includes substantial debt. You can accept this inheritance, or you can walk away from it. Or," she added, "we can proceed with filing criminal referrals. The choice is now yours." Michael looked at Daniel, a silent, frantic communication passing between them. Daniel looked at the floor, defeated. They signed, their signatures slashed across the page, because sometimes fear is the only voice that can shout down pride. In that moment, they finally understood what it meant to lose. 3 months later, the consequences unfolded with a grim inevitability. Michael could not cover the massive mortgage payments. The bank foreclosed on the house. The cabin followed suit. The auction prices didn't cover the loans, leaving both brothers personally liable for the shortfalls. Michael's gambling addiction, now a matter of public record, led to his expulsion from his professional association. He filed for bankruptcy. Bianca left him, citing irreconcilable differences and financial instability. Daniel's misappropriated funds were traced, and he faced a barrage of lawsuits from former clients. His reputation destroyed. He lost his partnership and now works as a nighttime auditor at a chain hotel near the highway, a ghost of his former self. Their world of curated success collapsed into dust and lawsuits. They tried to call me. They sent pleading emails. I did not respond. Peter had given me peace. They had crafted their own ruin. I sold a portion of the Anchor Holdings assets, enough to ensure lifelong comfort. The rest remains, growing quietly. I bought a small, sun-filled cottage in a coastal village where the cliffs meet the sea. It is mine, utterly and completely. No ghosts of betrayal walk these halls. No memories linger in the corners. I planted a garden, lavender, rosemary, climbing roses against a stone wall. Each new bud feels like a promise that life can indeed begin again. Even after a scorched earth, I wake to the sound of gulls, not the silence of a haunted house. I enrolled in a ceramics class. I volunteer at the local historical society, cataloging archive. I have learned the profound pleasure of a morning with no anxiety, just coffee and the horizon. Peter didn't just leave me money. He returned to me, my agency, my future, my freedom. And freedom feels like the first full breath after being submerged for a very long time. I am no longer the woman Michael and Daniel dismissed. I am simply Clara, and that is more than enough. If this journey has taught me anything, it is this: never mistake stillness for surrender. Michael and Daniel believed I was feeble because I didn't rage. They believed I was powerless because I didn't fight on their battlefield. But quiet people observe, they listen, they remember. If you are hearing this, and you feel cornered by family, by circumstance, by those who treat your heart as a negligible thing, remember this: strength does not always roar. Sometimes it is the quiet decision to endure, to watch, to wait, to know when to bend and when to stand firm, to choose yourself when no one else will. Peter gave me the tools, but I had to find the courage within myself to wield them. And in the end, that made all the difference. Your story is not over. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters are written only after everything you thought was solid falls away. Sometimes, you have to lose the world you knew to find the one where you truly belong.